Science, Life, and Jane Goodall by Tom Cantrell. The sun was but a memory, and night held sway in this remote Eden where I found myself. My fire was cheery and held the springtime temperatures approaching freezing in this high-altitude area of mine in the mountains of northwest corner of California at bay. I was relaxed in my weather-tight nest inside the huge old burned-out fir tree when it began. First came the falls and the night, followed by the arrival of three denizens of the night. One huge fellow, well over 8 feet in height. One less so at about 7.5 feet in height, and the third smaller at some 6.5 feet in height. All were hirsute from the top of their peaked head to the bottom of their very large, very flat feet. That they were a family group became obvious as the night progressed, for they acted and reacted exactly as a human family would act and react one to the other. For the entire night I observed and interacted with this trio until the return of light forced their retirement from the scene. This story is told in full on my YouTube channel, Tom Cantrell channel, under the title Go Road 1978 Encounter. This scenario is factual. It occurred in May of 1978 in the area so stated. I did my very best to emulate the leading historical primatologist, Miss Jane Goodall, in observing and noting my observations in the hope that one day I might find somebody who would pay official attention to my work. Alas, that has never happened, and I have learned to live with that fact, but it has gotten to the point where it is interesting to watch the machinations of those of the powers that be in this field. Science as a whole is antagonistic to our efforts, mainly for their own reasons, I suppose, but it makes our efforts doubly difficult to advertise. I did work in the scenario above entirely as Miss Goodall did in her work in Gombe, but it has never seen the light of day beyond my own efforts. Over the years, I have invented devices to generate data important to my research without any notoriety or acclaim concerning them. I have created standards for estimating things like height and weight from merely knowing the length of the track, but to date, no scientific type has come forth to ask about them. Although my device for determining the weight of an individual utilizing the concept of duplicating the depth of the track was used by scientists on Monster Quest show on the A&E network on television. Why does it have to be this way? Why will mainstream science not acknowledge our efforts? Is this something new, or has it ever been the case? Let me begin by stating that no, this is not a new phenomenon. As far back as the work of Galileo, and probably even before that, investigations that flew in the face of established reason was rejected, often violently, by this establishment. Was not Marco Polo imprisoned for merely stating that people existed beyond the Mediterranean Sea basin? Galileo himself was nearly executed for stating the Earth was not the center of the universe, with all rotating around us as a hub. Columbus was labeled a heretic for stating that the Earth was round. One after another, the list goes on. Why would one think it would be any different in more modern times? In the 1920s, a now noted geologist formulated a theory for the formation of the scablands of eastern Washington by the rapid flooding and draining of huge quantities of water in a very short period of time, relatively speaking. J. Harlan Bress was excoriated for this heresy. Everyone knew that geological changes took eons, not decades, or so the convention was at the time. Eventually, his way will out and has become the accepted thesis today, chronicled in my essay, The Politics of Science, Chapter 6 in the book 70 Years on the Mountain. In the 1960s, two Yakima, Washington area cowboys were in Northern California and filmed a creature on a gravel bar of a stream called Bluff Creek, and had been ridiculed and defamed for more than 50 years for stating this was something unknown to science. I have personally heard a noted professor at a prestigious Eastern University state, quote, "These track castings have to be fake because they are all different. If they were from one creature, they would all be identical." What? To any tracker who knows anything about his business, if they were the same, that would be the cause to holler fake. Every time we step, our foot lands differently, or in a different medium, or in a different impedimenta. If they were identical, that would mean that they were the product of a hoax. When Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin offered their film to science, they were told, "Sasquatch is a myth. Therefore, any film purporting to show Sasquatch would be a myth as well, and would not even look at it." Is there any reason to think that this was any different for Dr. Goodall? No, it was not. As stated in National Geographic magazine, October 2017 issue, quote, "Jane had to contend with a primarily male science establishment, with women being actively discouraged from the sciences at that time, that didn't take her seriously. With media executives whose support hinged on her willingness to be scripted and glamorized. With men who said they'd be her partner or patron, but also sought control, concessions, or relationships that she didn't want. Through it all, Jane's philosophy seemed the same. She would endure slights, accommodate demands, tolerate fools, make sacrifices, if it served to sustain her work." End quote. Does that sound familiar to any of us? In many ways, Jane Goodall was one of us. When she began her work in Gombe, she did not have any college hours beyond a certificate stating that she was a qualified secretary and typist. The position she took with the Louis Leakey research team was as a secretary. It was he who sponsored her to the work on Tanzania, and even he, 30 years her senior and married, attempted to cash in on this sponsorship, declaring his love for her and wanting requital, which never came. In his defense, he did not allow her rejection of him to stop his sponsorship of her work. In 1961, with her study coming to an end due to lack of funding, Jane made an all-important discovery through a chimpanzee she had named David Graybeard for his white muzzle. When she observed him squatting by a termite mound, he then picked a blade of grass and poked it into a tunnel. When he pulled it out, it was covered with termites, which he promptly ate. In another instance, Jane saw him pick a twig, strip it of the leaves before using it to fish for termites. David Graybeard had exhibited tool use and tool making, two things that previously only humans were believed capable of. Jane then notified Dr. Leakey, who famously stated, quote, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as human." End quote. As a result of this work, National Geographic gave her a grant to continue her work. As her work began to be published, she met with harsh criticism and great skepticism from the scientific establishment. After all, quote, "She has no science training, no degree of any kind," end quote. In fact, Dr. Goodall was enrolled in and received her degree from Cambridge University on the basis of her thesis concerning her work, without ever taking undergraduate or even master's level classes prior to her doctorate. This had only happened twice in the university's history and was the result of Dr. Leakey's sponsorship and insistence. In the spring of 1962, Jane gave a presentation at the Zoological Society of London's Primate Symposium. While she was well received, with her work impressing many, she also received many brickbats and great derision. One noted society officer delivered a thinly veiled critique of her work as, quote, anecdote and speculation that made no real contribution to science, end quote. Associated Press treated her address with disdain while stating their coverage with, quote, a willowy blonde with more time for monkeys than men today told how she spent 15 months in the jungle to study the habits of apes, end quote. Does any of this sound familiar? Don't we suffer the same slings and arrows of outrageous fortune as did Miss Goodall? Are not the same edifices of science establishment equally resistant to the work we do? This begs then the question of what do we do? Where do we go from here? The answer is simple. We go on, as Dr. Goodall and later Dian Fossey did. We do our work and make the best observations we can, and we only speak when we have qualified data to pass on. This valiant lady lit our path. She led the way. She showed us how. Even today, she is on the road over 300 days a year promoting her cause and spreading her word. Can we do less? The key is we have to make sure that what we present is as accurate as that which she presented in her time on her subject. Assumptions made from chance sighting crossing the road in front of one's car will not serve. My brother-in-law said is not a valid argument. Collect your evidence as she did, meticulously. If you do not know how, learn. Surround yourself with people who can help. The old adage here of, if you can't be part of the solution, at least don't be part of the problem, is alive and well. Always associate only with those you can trust. They must be people whose word is their bond. If you cannot believe them at all times, do not have them around. And in conclusion, keep an open mind. I have never learned anything worth knowing from he who agreed with me completely. I learn from those who have a different opinion. And, if their argument is loosened, I will investigate it and apply that which is applicable. Remember, we don't have the clout of a Louis S.B. Leakey behind us. We do this on our own. Do it well.